Hey y'all, let's talk about live service games. Jason Schreier, he did a video called Why Everyone Wants a Live Service Game. We're going to be taking a look at that. I worked in live service games for some amount of time and around them, and they've been big for a while. So let's see what he's got to say.
Hello. Live service has become one of the dirtiest phrases in the video game industry. If you say it in front of a gamer, chances are they will roll their eyes, they will scoff at you, they will spit in your face, they will slap you, they will do, well, maybe not go that far. But look, people hate the idea of live service games, and
I hear this, and you see this on the internet, you see this with people commenting on videos, you see this in Reddit, forums, Discords, these sorts of things. I always want to call out when someone says like gamers don't like live service games or something like that. Some gamers who are aware of this stuff don't like live service games, but we have to be careful about generalizing that to mean all gamers. One of the problems we can run into is we focus in on the vocal individuals that are out there, and we don't actually see the rest. There's a ton of people who play a ton of live service games and don't think about it at all. It doesn't bother them. They don't really care. Often they're free to play live service games. Whatever it is, they just are enjoying it, playing it. Not a big deal to them. And they don't even know that there's this whole dialogue. There's this game dev industry drama going on. So when we talk about somebody who would be upset at you for saying you wanted to make a live service game or whatever it is, like mentioning live service games, recognize, yes, there are those people. They are not the majority player out there. They're not the majority gamer. That is somebody who has spent more time than the average gamer becoming informed around what the industry might look like and form opinions around that. Anyway, I always want to... This is something that gets me because I see us in game dev make this mistake a lot, where we overinterpret the loudest minority voices. And you want to pay attention to those, but you have to be careful because a lot of the people that play your game will never go to a forum, will never leave a feedback, form filled out. They won't ever contact you in any way. They're just going to play your game, and if they don't like it, they'll stop. And if they do like it, they'll keep playing it. So just putting that caveat into the space here, because the way he framed it is like gamers don't like live service games. It's like actually, vast majority of gamers don't care.
There's a good reason for that. Over the last decade, we have seen video game companies force their studios into creating live service games, or at the very least pressure them into doing so. And as a result, we've seen some of people's favorite game studios get kind of eviscerated, or at the very least, their reputations have been shattered. We've seen...
This is totally true. And again, gamers that are aware of some of these things can get annoyed at live service games because, he's going to get into it, but like there has been pressure. There have been people who have been making games. I know of people who were making games. They thought that they were good games and they weren't live service. And then they started getting pushed to turn it into a live service when it didn't make sense. And they were like, wait, we've got a good game here. This game is going to be successful. It's probably going to return we're going to make money on this. And now you want me to go and pivot it, contort the gameplay systems to add meta progression loops that weren't already there to try to see how we can turn it into some ongoing live service. Like, what are you doing? So that absolutely has happened. And is, well, he'll probably talk about it. It's tragic in some cases.
Games like Anthem and Suicide Squad and many more come out to negative reception and mediocre commercial success as a result of the companies behind them saying, hey, you, single-player studio that is really good at making games in a specific genre, why don't you now try making a multiplayer live service game? But what exactly is a live service game, and why have they become such a popular trend? Why do companies want them so badly? Why did Sony say a few years ago they were going to make at least 12 live service games, much to fans' chagrin? I think it's really important to understand this, because rather than just getting angry online about this trend, which Don't get me wrong, it's okay to do. I think it's important to get why it's happening. So let's go back.
Yeah. And I for the players that do know, for the gamers out there, the people that are informed, and they're the ones that are likely to read a Sony statement of some kind, saying stuff like this reminds me of when I think it was the Ubisoft CEO or something started talking about Web3 or blockchain. I can't remember exactly. And it was just like, what are we doing? Right. Like but they're not saying it to you. And I think that's really important. They're saying it to the people that they want investment money from. They're saying it to people who are more aware of the financial picture of the global economy than they are of what players actually enjoy and how different technologies or platforms or business models for games impact players. So it's not for you. It's just that they have to put it out in public in order for those other people to see it, and so the players see it. And yeah, easy to take offense, and perhaps appropriately.
Back in time a little bit. There was once an era, let's call it, 2000 to 2010, when big game companies could find a lot of success by releasing a string of new games every year, multiple new games every year, so-called AAA games that were considered high-end graphical fidelity for the time, that maybe cost between, let's call it $10 to $30 million to produce, and that were pretty reliably going to sell at least 1 million copies and make their companies a significant amount of money.
1 million copies, actually, in the area he's talking about, would be pretty decent. Like you didn't even have to sell 1 million to make your money back. That would be, you made more than probably went into the game. Like, let's say you're at the bottom end of his budget, a $10 million game, and you sell it for $40 a pop. You only have to sell like 500K of those with marketing, and you're in the black. But yes, like this is spot on. This is how things did operate for a very long time. I actually have another video coming out related to this.
At least 1 million copies and make their companies a significant amount of money. Something changed over the course of the 2010s and into the 2020s, which is that these games started to cost a lot more. We've seen games go from $20 to $30 million to make to $200 to $300 million to make. And that's kind of the floor for AAA games these days. You can see some of my previous videos for why games have taken so long to make and also why they cost so much to make. But that is what happened.
I will say there are still products coming in under that. It's 200 to 300 is not necessarily the floor. Pragmata, I think most people would consider it a AAA game coming out of a well-regarded AAA studio publisher setup. And it was under 100 million. But that broad idea is that I think there was someone that did like an average of the AAA games, what were their budgets, and it was over 200. It was like 250 or 300 or something like that.
They cost so much to make, but that is what happened. As a result of that, it was no longer possible to just spend your way to success. Games these days that spend upwards of $300+ million are requiring such a sales threshold to actually see a return on that investment that is no longer possible to just brute force your way into a hit. As a result, companies have looked around and said, hey, this is a volatile hit-driven industry. It's always been a volatile hit-driven industry, but in the past, we could at least find some success by just consistently releasing games in these hit franchises and then making sequels out of them and continuing to try new things, and we would generally get results. Now, the stakes are too high. The costs are too big, the lengths of these development cycles are too long, so we can't do that anymore. Well, what can we do? How can we make sure that we stay solvent and stay afloat and continuing making money, whether we're privately owned and we're just making money for our investors and our owners, or we are publicly owned and we are continually making a profit and seeing growth for our shareholders? That is kind of our reason for existence, is to do that. So
yeah, it's funny, actually, because I did just make a video that's going to be coming out, or might already be out when you see this, where I talk about this and some of the simple mechanics of it. You used to have a publisher that would have a portfolio of products, and they would have a mix of maybe sequels or known IPs inside of that, new tries at different things that might be successful. And they didn't all have to succeed in order for the publisher to be successful. In fact, very few of them had to succeed in order for the publisher to make some amount of money back because the budgets of any individual game was low enough. Once those budgets start going up, you can't have one hit pay off a whole ton of mixed results or failed games. You needed actually most of your games to hit, and that was happening at the same time that more people were making more games, and so the market was becoming more saturated. The hit rate was going relatively down. At the same time, the cost was going up, and again, people were put in this tough situation. So in my mind, I'm already like, I don't want to get too far ahead of him. I'm going to let him talk. But yeah, like the live service plays a role in this for sure in terms of being what I call the goose that lays the golden egg. Does this sound familiar? You're in a leadership role at a game studio. Everyone is busy working. No one has any time. But the actual game itself isn't in a good spot. Maybe it's the tech. Maybe it's the lack of a validated prototype. Maybe it's that every person seems to have a different idea about what we're trying to build. But you've got a job. There are reports to send, meetings to schedule and facilitate, the occasional season of performance reviews to go through. And everyone is always so busy. When you step back, it makes you wonder if everyone is just going to keep slowly walking towards the abyss until the project or game fails. Is this what it means to be a leader in games? In tech? To endlessly repeat the same sequence of meetings without really moving the needle? To spend hours trying to get Jira tickets and dashboards where they should be? To pretend that everything is fine when you know deep down it really isn't? It doesn't have to be this way. You can make a difference. You can help your team and game succeed, but sometimes you need a bit of help to get there. I've started a game dev leadership accelerator. It aims to level up leaders who see opportunities to make a difference but don't know how to capitalize on them. We'll walk through what it means to lead well and give you tools to understand your organization's challenges and implement changes to overcome them. Game dev is hard. Knowing how to lead will give you an edge. It will still be hard, but you'll be ready to tackle it. If you're interested, let me know below, hit the link. I hope to see you in the accelerator because I believe better leaders will help teams make better games, and I look forward to someday playing what you create.
For our shareholders, that is kind of our reason for existence, is to do that. So, and again, we're not talking about indies here. That's a different world that I'll get into in a future video. We're talking about the kind of the big budget, the companies that are trying to make the big bucks out of video games, the Ubisofts and EAs and Activisions of the world. At the same time, we are seeing an explosion in so-called live service games. Now, live service games have been around for a very long time. The idea of a live service game is essentially a game. Man, I should have started with this, but hey, I don't edit here. I just record raw, so I'm going to give a definition of live service right now. A live service game is a video game that is designed for recurring monetization. It is as simple as that. I've seen a lot of people get this wrong, use this as kind of use this in the wrong way. Use that term to describe games that are absolutely not live service games. Most notably, there were headlines a couple of months ago when that game from the Imagine Dragons people came out, Last Flag. There were headlines that called it a live service game. That was not a live service game. That was a game you bought once and you played multiplayer, but there was no recurring monetization in that game. A live service game is a game that has recurring monetization, period.
That is an interesting definition. He's stating that very factually, and I think when you look at it through the business lens, when you had like a CFO or someone who was looking at how we can make money, that might be how they viewed this. The reality is, if I made a game and it had a multiplayer component, and it was, let's say, on Xbox Live or something, and people were playing it online and continuing to play it online, and I was supporting it to some degree or another, that would be a live service game, even if I only ever had one box product in mind. Now, you might say, well, yeah, but if people are continuing to play it, aren't you going to do a DLC? Aren't you going to, patch it, do updates, anything like that? But yes, but how I monetize, or if I monetize some of those things, is not necessarily, it's not a one-to-one. So I don't know if I fully agree with his definition, although I think in the context he's talking about it is helpful. But I can think of games in my head where there was not really going to be later ways to make money, but that game was a live service for the players that were enjoying it. So I think he's too narrowly defined the definition. He's kind of looked at it through the financial lens, which is fine in the context of the video, where we're talking about why does everybody want a live service game. Are also like technical or gameplay things that might make a game live service. And again, I think we're moving away from those. Most that are in the live service world are now trying to figure out some way to continue to monetize over a longer period of time to keep interest in. But I can still imagine titles, and I wish I could think of one off the top of my head. Maybe someone out there can help me, of like a game where, hey, we're going to have this game. It's going to launch. It's going to be out there. It's going to exist. People are going to continue to play it. We're going to maintain it, patch it, have a small team working on it for a long period of time. And maybe that's just to set up the sequel. And you could say, well, then the live service component, like is Call of Duty a live service game? Before there were all the microtransactions that were integrated into it, because there were sequels. And it's like, well, not because it was funded, but because it was available for everybody to play on a variety of platforms in multiplayer match-made setups. So anyway, yeah, disagree a little bit with his definition there, but we'll run with it again inside of the context he's talking about. I think it makes sense. I would just say that I wouldn't like hold that line as like, hey, in order to be a live service game, you have to be seeking future revenue from the product. That you could, and you can imagine why that might be wise, because if you're spending money on a live service product, you have to eventually make that money back, or you might want to continue to make money on that product. But there are other ways to solve that problem, right? And so maybe, yeah, just slight disagreement there.
In that game, a live service game is a game that has recurring monetization, period. It can be a single player game. Usually it is a multiplayer game. Some developers have released single player games that just will continue to get expansions and new content that is sold piecemeal. That is a live service game. But most of the time it is an online game that has some sort of monetization that is designed for recurring spend. In other words, they want players to start playing the game and keep spending money over time. One of the most popular live service games way back in the day was EverQuest, one of the first big, or certainly the biggest MMO for its era, which came out in 1999 and required people to not only buy a box product, but also pay monthly for a subscription, which of course led to a lot of recurring revenue. Then came World of Warcraft, which really exploded that formula. It took EverQuest subscribers and multiplied them by 10 and then by 20. Even bigger version of a live service game that really just kind of dominated Blizzard and turned it into such a powerhouse over the years. Then we saw other examples of that. League of Legends was another prominent live service game. Counter-Strike, many more. Dota 2. But really, it was Fortnite that really set the dollar signs, visions of dollar signs into the heads of executives worldwide. And that's because Fortnite was one of the most...
I think he's pegged that late. I think people started being aware of it. You saw all the companies that tried to make a WoW killer. That was well before Fortnite. People realized that if I could make a product that monetized as well as something like WoW, or even EverQuest before it, and then League of Legends, I could run a company off of the profit of one game indefinitely, which is what a lot of these studios do. That's why I call it the goose that lays the golden egg. If you've managed to create a product that can run in perpetuity, you can keep it alive and keep bringing new players in at least as fast as you're losing them, you can continue to get people spending money, then you often don't need to spend all the money you're making in that product running the team, so you can run other teams, you can expand the business, you can do a bunch of different things, you can seek investment. Like it's crazy what it can unlock and the stability it can provide. And a lot of those sorts of games actually did provide a baseline of stability. Like WoW provided stability for Blizzard as a studio, where if you go and you read actually his book, Play Nice, there were a lot of times where even Blizzard early on, they were kind of running up against it, trying to get the game done to the quality they needed and, not run out of money. And there was a lot of tension and pressure and how is it going to work with the various publishers and all this different stuff. A lot of game studios were in that place of there was just mass instability. So I'm sure he's going to talk about this stuff. But yeah, I would peg Fortnite as a pretty late time to say this is really what made live service take off. I think people were very interested in it far before that, and you saw that with the MMO craze that happened years before Fortnite, and MMOs were probably the first version of that, because Counter-Strike was a mod. I mean, it wasn't monetized for some time, in some official way that like Valve was benefiting from, and so yeah, okay, keep rolling.
Signs into the heads of executives worldwide. And that's because Fortnite was one of the most popular. Fortnite came out and became a cultural phenomenon. It reached millions and millions and millions of people and got them in for free. It was free to play. You could just jump in, download it without paying a cent, and then got them paying for skins, for costumes, for dances, for all sorts of stuff, and kept them playing through this kind of just never-ending model of adding new stuff to the game, changing the maps, adding new seasons full of content, adding new characters, and so on and so forth.
So here, then, I'm also going to interpret this. I think he's taking a Western lens on this. Like that's how I would understand what he's saying, because that already existed. And one of the things that was interesting is when you look at League of Legends, if WoW really made that goose that lays the golden egg concept really clear to the Western world, the Eastern world was already like running down these paths. They were already running free-to-play models. They were already running, PC cafes and a different PC bongs, right? These sorts of things. In the East, in China, in Korea, and elsewhere, like Philippines, whatever. They already had a different model of monetization and way of people engaging with games that wasn't like we do in the West. It was a very different model. And actually, one of the things that League of Legends did quite well, was take some of the things in that model, bring it into the West, and then have it be successful. Now, to be fair, the vast bulk of that audience for League of Legends remained in the East, but it put that idea into the Western conscience. Everything he was just talking about with it's a free-to-play game where they produce skins and seasons and all these different things, that was not Fortnite. Fortnite, though, was a game that got very big in the Western world. There are other games that have been as big, but like in the West, Fortnite was that sort of cultural touchstone game. And so again, from a Western executive perspective, if you weren't paying that much attention to what had come before, maybe Fortnite was like oh, wait a minute, I want to try to pull this off. But if you were paying attention, you were watching markets around the world prior to this, like this was already being done. And so anyway, yeah, I'm getting into the little nitty gritty here, but I don't agree that Fortnite was the starting point for this, unless if you look at it through sort of this very particular lens.
Adding new seasons full of content, adding new characters, and so on and so forth. So every company looked over that and said, hey, wow, these live service games can be pretty popular and can make a bunch of money. We should get some of those. And there were a couple of reasons for that. I mean, first and foremost, it's because that's an easy way to make money. And a lot of these companies are just jumping on trends as often as possible, as we saw a few years ago during the era of NFTs, which was quickly followed by the era of metaverse, when pretty much every game company, whether or not they'll admit it now, was talking about how NFTs were going to be the future on their earnings calls, and in a way to appease investors that thought that NFTs were going to be the future, which is just, I mean, I think even at the time most people realized how silly that was. But anyway,
almost every dev I know just didn't see it. And it's kind of funny. And this comes back to that idea of when they're talking about these things, when they're talking about these trends, who are you talking to? Because gamers don't care. And if they do care, they care because they're like, no, don't jump on the trend. Just try to make good games. The investors care. And so these game studios, publishers, they talk about this stuff because they're talking to an audience that is illiterate in game development and literate in tech trends and finance and macroeconomics. And so you get these weird, like, twisted messages around it, where it's like, you weren't the audience, players. So even though you're all annoyed, this might have still done its job if it meant that we were more likely to get funding from some group.
It's just, I mean, I think even at the time, most people realized how silly that was. But anyway, the point is that the games industry is very much a trend chasing industry. When League of Legends came out, everyone wanted to do MOBAs. When World of Warcraft came out, everyone wanted to do MMOs. Ultimately, you only see a couple of winners out of these trends, but it is a trend driven industry. And we've seen it's very much a copycat industry. We've seen that happen over and over again. So a lot of these executives are.
And I would say that that's not specific to games either, like software, apps, even inside of the games and like a Roblox experience. If you make a really impressive Roblox experience that brings in a bunch of people, you better believe there's going to be a bunch of people trying to jump on that, copy it, do it subtly better or differently or whatever. Like that's just human nature. Oh, I saw something that worked. Let me go make a different thing. Like Uber comes out and then a bunch of other things come out and Lyft is still around. There's that like, is it the first mover advantage versus like, oh, getting to learn from the first one's mistakes as they become a bloated bureaucracy. Maybe you can be faster and quicker and better at something or whatever. But yeah, there's all these different arguments you could make of like, do you want to be first? Do you want to be second? Do you want to be third? Any industry any success attracts people who want to emulate that success, period. It's not local to games, but it is, again, I think that idea of you see that when you see people who are more in touch and see this stuff as a tech trend or like look at where financial attention is going versus the people who are deeply interested and concerned with games. And if you have more of the first, you will start chasing trends inside of your studio or publisher, whatever.
It's very much a copycat industry. We've seen that happen over and over again. So a lot of these executives are looking at live service games and saying, hey, I went in on that trend. I went in on that money. And that is kind of reason number one, of course. But there's another reason, a more existential reason, a reason that I think follows more sound logic than just I want money, that makes money, give me one of those. And that reason is that a live service game can be the backbone of your company and allow you to keep making money in an industry that is volatile and can otherwise lead you to fall apart if you release a few bad bets, which is what happened to Ubisoft. Ubisoft, for people who haven't been following, really peaked in 2017 or 2018 or so with some of their games that were really big hits, like Assassin's Creed Odyssey and The Division 2, and then shortly afterwards had a string of really big flops that led to the company really struggling in recent years. If you look at their stock chart over the last decade or so, it kind of looks like this, like. It's like a good comparison might be if you are a basketball fan, the win probability chances of the Spurs against the Knicks for 4 games, which is like anyway. So some of these companies, they look at live service games and they say, hey, that is recurring revenue that can help us keep afloat when our games are not, when our games are a lot riskier. It is
and I'll just cut in here. I want to let him keep going. This is what I mean when I said like the goose lays the golden egg for a company. He mentioned Ubisoft. Ubisoft is a more recent one. They're still kind of fighting for survival. They've managed to get some investment. There are others that I can't even remember right now. Various like Interactive this or, this Interactive that if you look back through time, like Sierra, I think there were game publishers and studios that were good at producing hits. And then they had 1 or 2 misses and they were done. Or they even had hits, something that still happens today, but it wasn't enough to keep the company afloat until the money came back in. And so they had to shut down. There is a high volatility that has just been present for a very long time in game development. I know we look at it today and we see all the layoffs and we're just, this is appalling, this is crazy. And some people do compare it to the crash of the video game crash of the 80s and say it's worse or this or that or the other, as bad, whatever it might be. But there was not really a time where you had stability in game development until live service games became more of a thing. Because they created for these companies a floor of, because Blizzard has a World of Warcraft, and World of Warcraft is stable enough as a yearly expansion with an ongoing subscription, we get to say that like we can afford to have this many people now, and they can just keep working here, and they can try to do different things, and we don't need to put all of them on World of Warcraft. We can build other games off of the funds we're making. We're stable. Riot has had League of Legends. Now it's got League of Legends. It's got TFT. It's got Valorant. You look at Warframe, even games like World of Tanks for wargaming. CCP with EVE Online. Like, there are companies that historically would have been just like continually needing to make hits. They would like, I need another hit. I need another hit. I need another hit. Sounds like drugs. In some ways it's sort of not the worst analogy, but it is like, I have to be successful. I have to get this money back in, or we're going to stop. And so they sometimes would amalgamate into publishers, and then the publishers could sort of distribute risk appropriately, where if BioShock has like a bad game, then like the EA can kind of cover over because they know BioShock will probably come true eventually. But so you're sharing risk a little bit inside of those structures. But like, if you didn't have that kind of thing, you just had to keep winning. And if you ever lost, it could be over for the company. And there are a lot of good companies where that happened, and they'd produce great games, and people would say, what a storied studio, but their last game didn't come together like they thought. They ran out of money before they could ship it, or they shipped it and it wasn't as good as they thought, didn't have the audience, whatever it was. And there were a lot of variables that made that risky. Imagine if you could have just like, let's not even talk about the huge giant ones like Fortnite or Counter-Strike or something. Let's say you could have, I don't know, like a Maple Story or a RuneScape, right? Not to, like, RuneScape is a very impressive game, but like, you don't, like I said, like a Warframe. There are games that are pretty far down the list, like even Rainbow Six Siege for Ubisoft, that they're making money. They're making decent money. They're helping support that company. They're creating a floor. And if you didn't have that, things would be a lot worse off, but you have a continual revenue stream. And so I think this is the big attraction of this. It's like, obviously, yes, we want to be able to keep making money forever, and more money is great, and our investors love it and all this different stuff. But wouldn't it be nice to be able to work at the same company for a long period of time and realize that for many people in game development, it was rare. Let's put it that way. It was rare. You were doing a lot of bouncing around. There were a lot of game launches. We fired the people who we no longer need. There were a lot of game launches. Studio shuts down. There were a lot of game doesn't launch and we shut down. And just a continual cycling of studios trying to create entertainment, trying to create something that players love. Man, wouldn't it be nice if we just had a floor? Wouldn't it be nice if we could tell an investor, hey, maybe we aren't even paying for ourselves completely, but look at this. We can cover 80% of our expenses. We only need to cover the last 20%. And we can probably return that 20% with this game that we're building. It's a much easier pitch, and it's a much higher degree of stability for everybody inside of game dev. And actually, the live service brought about, I think, a period of shocking stability that has been disrupted post-COVID because those teams overhired and paid giant salaries, and the budgets of AAA have gotten so big. But like your Riots, your Fortnites, your Riots, your Epics, like your Blizzards, even things like Activision with Call of Duty, and the studios that make it, you actually had an ongoing job you could work at for more than one or two game cycles and expect to just be able to continue doing that. If you're working on The Sims, you're working on the EA sports franchises, it's stable to a degree that games weren't before. And I know that those are actually, a lot of those are talking more about like sequels and things like that, but it all ties into this. You wanted something like that, because yes, a live service game is one way for a goose that lays the golden egg. I would also say that Call of Duty is another great example of a goose that lays the golden egg. This franchise, it prints money, and it provides a floor for your entire organization, for your studio, for your publisher, whatever it is.
When our games are a lot riskier. It is you are mitigating risk when you have a game that continually makes money, because you are not reliant on waiting 4, 5, 6, 7 years for a game to actually come out and then seeing if it'll hit. Because if you are a company that is just releasing a new game every 5 years and spending, I don't know, $200 million on that game, you are really hoping that it is going to sell between I don't know, 8 and 15 million copies, because you not only need to make back the money that you spent on that game, you also need to sustain your company moving forward.
Yep.
And that is a really difficult business to be in. That is a really tough proposition that a lot of companies have struggled with. And that is why all of the successful game publishers that we see these days have some sort of live service game as their backbone. Take-Two Interactive is one of the biggest game publishers. They have two. They have NBA 2K, which is, granted, that's an annualized game franchise, so it's a little bit different than your average live service, but a large chunk of that revenue, of the money they make from NBA 2K, their basketball series, comes from people spending money in the game. Those are live service games where you can spend money to buy all sorts of stuff. If you're in, there are different modes within the game. A lot of them are just very heavy on the microtransactions and on getting people to spend money to play them and to get good within them. They also have GTA Online, which is one of the biggest things on the planet. GTA 5. By the way, sometimes I like to quiz people, even people in the games industry. I'm like, how many copies do you think GTA 5 has sold? And sometimes they'll be like, 50 million, 100 million copies.
Oh, shoot. What is it? Oh, man, I saw this recently. I'm reacting, so you guys are going to see if I'm right or wrong. The number is absurd. It's like 350. Or is that Minecraft? No, Minecraft I think is higher. He's going to tell. I'm going to say 350 to 500 million. And that's a pretty tight range. If I were to give you a 90% confidence interval, I would have to extend both sides. But we'll just be overly precise and probably wrong. But that'll be the range I give.
GTA 5 has sold. And sometimes they'll be like, 50 million, 100 million copies. Yeah, pretty big. It's a pretty big game, right? And I'll blow their minds a little bit when I'll be like, GTA 5, Grand Theft Auto 5 has sold 230 million copies. Down the road, when we get closer to GTA 6, I'll be reporting a lot on Bloomberg and talking a lot about why that game is going to be such a smash hit and why the expectations are so high for that game, to the point where everybody is moving their release dates to get out of the way of it. And the biggest reason is that the last game has sold, once again, 230 million copies. It is the second best-selling game of all time, second only to Minecraft, which kind of an unfair comparison because Minecraft is much less money and also is available on phones, whereas GTA is only PC and consoles. So really, if you're looking at console games, I mean, GTA 5 is the biggest of all time. And GTA Online is recurring revenue, is a live service that continually makes money by selling players shark cards and whatever else. And so that those two games, NBA 2K and GTA, have really kept Take-Two going, even as some of its games have either been hits or misses. It's released some games that have been misses. Marvel's Midnight Suns was a miss for that, which is unfortunate because that was a really good game. Civilization 7 wasn't quite the hit they wanted it to be, although I think it did okay. Borderlands 4 wasn't a big hit for them. Mafia: The Old Country did pretty well last year, but it wasn't. Again, these are just kind of these hits or misses. You can withstand some misses if you have this backbone of recurring revenue.
It's funny because when I hear those, like Civilization 7, I think underperformed. I don't know if it made its budget back. I haven't actually looked into that, but I would say it underperformed based on whatever I think expectations could have been. And the Mafia game, it reminds me of like something that you'd see at like a film festival. It's like an artsy game, like look at this cool stuff we can do, but they're not. It didn't do as well. But yeah, to his point, Take-Two's got a floor. They've got a floor in GTA. And it's interesting because when you look at how much money is being spent into GTA 6 to make it in the billions with a B, you go like, oh my goodness, they must be so massively in debt. And it's like, actually, they're making so much money with their existing live service games that they're not. That they're probably actually still doing all right. I don't know exactly what the numbers would be. Maybe they're still losing money over time or maybe gaining it slightly, but like they're in good shape, especially because GTA 6 is going to be a cultural moment in an entertainment sense that we haven't seen in a very long time.
And some misses if you have this backbone of recurring revenue.
Right, exactly.
Other companies have it too. I mean, Microsoft, Xbox, they have plenty of problems, but they also have Minecraft, which is a very helpful baseline as for recurring revenue. Sony found some success. PlayStation found some success with Helldivers 2. Epic Games obviously has Fortnite. Riot Games has League of Legends. Blizzard has World of Warcraft and Overwatch. And really, Blizzard, all of their games are live service games. Since World of Warcraft, all of their games have turned into these kind of never-ending franchise, never-ending games that just live on forever with recurring monetization of some sort.
Except for StarCraft 2, poor game. But I mean, you could argue it kind of is trying to be, but like not really. But yeah. No, I do want to push back a little bit because he was like, well, Minecraft, we won't count that because it's on all the different platforms. Like, oh, I still think you need to count Minecraft. Like that I think it's unfair to pull it out just based on that, unless if you wanted to localize and say, we're just talking about console. And like Minecraft is insane and it's a crazy phenomenon. And yes, it's a lower price point, but like it's been around for a long time and it's amazing that they're continuing to make money on it.
Games that just live on forever with recurring monetization of some sort. And in fact, Blizzard over the years has put an early end to at least a couple of games because there was no way to have recurring monetization for them. For example, Diablo 3, which that's a whole nother story. I wrote about that in Play Nice, my Blizzard book, but essentially it was going to have a second expansion that was canceled before it even got off the ground, before Reaper of Souls, the first expansion, even came out. And one of the reasons for that is because Diablo 3 didn't have a viable form of recurring monetization. They tried with the real money auction house, but that was a big failure that players hated. And so as a result, they did not have a real form of recurring monetization, which made that second expansion seem less viable to the people who ran Blizzard at the time. So live service, it can really be this infrastructure that keeps you afloat and makes you less susceptible to failure if you do release one of these big risky games and it is not a huge hit. And so that's why we're seeing so many of these companies just pursue that model. Again, a lot of it is just kind of simple, let's call it, I don't know, greed is not the right word because it isn't about kind of, when we use greedy to refer to companies, we're kind of taking human motivations and applying them to machines that really do not operate like humans. When you are running EA, you are not acting out of greed. You are acting out of being part of a system where your duty is to be to maximize shareholder value. And so therefore you are doing what you think will make as much money as possible for shareholders, not because of your personal greed, although you might have some of that, but that's not what motivates you. What motivates you is doing your job and trying to do that successfully. So greed is really the wrong word. But it's, these companies are just trying to maximize their profits and they're trying to minimize their risk, and live service games are a way to do that. Now, you might argue...
I appreciate him calling us out. I think we can still sometimes call it greed, but he's right. And coming back to my long rants earlier, imagine you could have a company that was stable, that had more money than it needed to run, that didn't have to take a giant risk to spin up a new game, that didn't have to jeopardize the families of the employees that you've hired, right? Because in volatile industries, one of the realities of things like layoffs, which are sometimes just a financial outcome of there being insufficient money left to pay people, is that there's a bunch of people who now can't pay the mortgage, might have to move, have to go looking for work, may have trouble doing that, don't have health insurance. Like, there's all these impacts. And yes, some people don't care about that because they're psychopaths or whatever, but a lot of people do. And the idea of like being able to mitigate that risk, not just for that individual or for the company as a whole, but for those people. He said like these organizations operate and they're supposed to be sort of more like machines that are maximizing shareholder value. And yeah, there's truth to that and there's issues there. And it's a whole separate topic about the nature of the stock market and, what are we driving people towards and time horizon, short, mid, long term, that sort of blah, 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 blah. Lots of stuff you could talk about there. But they are people. The leaders of these companies are people. And so they can be motivated by things like greed, and that greed can cause them to do things and justify it as maximizing shareholder value, or they can justify other things and still say that that is long-term the best move for shareholder value. We see this actually with some of the Japanese companies, Nintendo probably being the most famous, giving people raises, cutting executive salaries when things aren't going well. Like they're making a different call. And you could say like, well, aren't you supposed to be maximizing shareholder value? And I go, you are. It's just you're maximizing it in the long term. But there's also a human centricity to that of we know, and it's I think it's not even just like, well, we'll do this because if we care about our people or act like we care about our people, then our people will perform better. And so we'll get better performance. And so it's really all about better. I think some of it actually does come down to in some of these companies, like it's not all these people are not monsters. I really am actually trying to do a good thing because I care about these individuals. And the idea of being able to have something that provides that floor is immensely valuable to me because it's immensely valuable to my employees because it preserves their way of life. And it has a bunch of other good effects to the business and the organization. It has some downsides as well, which is interesting. Maybe talk about that some other time. But yeah, that's anyway. I think he's spot on, and I appreciate him taking this lens. And I think this is what he does actually quite well on his channel. Generally, is give you a perspective and help you see it from that different angle, that different perspective. Than is the default where we can tend to oversimplify the world, the good guys, bad guys framing, or like the greedy capitalists versus the peons or whatever it is. Like we can oversimplify the world and it all fits, but it doesn't capture the nuanced reality. And he's just like, hey, here's a perspective that is a different view. It doesn't necessarily mean your simplified view is wrong. It is simply a different way of viewing all those same things. So I like that about what Jason Schreier is doing with these.
And live service games are a way to do that. Now, you might argue that these days, trying to get a live service off the ground is actually more risky than trying to release a single player product. And I think that companies are looking around and trying to find other ways to mitigate risk and maybe withdrawing a little bit from the live service world. But still, I mean, live service is still the most lucrative area you can go into. It's still recurring revenue. It's still revenue that will just continue to be stable and be a backbone for your company and can help make up for some of those flops. But yeah, these days
Yeah, and what are the other things you see companies moving into? He talked about like NBA 2K. There are sequels that function similar to live service, where if you have a product market fit and you continue to release sequels and you can get people sort of on a cadence of, hey, I just know that there's going to be a bunch of people that are going to buy this every year, probably, as long as I make it and it doesn't suck. Congratulations. This is a much safer bet than trying to go do something new. You also see studios doing not just sequels, but remakes. Like this has become huge recently. Naughty Dog, and you go back and you look at like when was the last time Naughty Dog released a totally new game, and it's a long time ago. But they've been releasing games that are like, okay, we ported this to here, we remade this, we updated this. Like, they're doing remasters and things like that because it brings in revenue, it brings in cash, and there's people that want to play that game on their new hardware. They want it to look a little bit nicer or better. It's a game that has a product market fit. It's a way to reduce your risk and keep everything moving. I think eventually that might run out. And that is actually the concern, is what I see as a lot of these studios who don't have the sort of stable baseline of a pure live service game, where there's still sort of, like a League of Legends or a World of Warcraft or Lineage or, whatever else you might have out there, Final Fantasy 14. Like MMOs and the big free-to-play ones, even Fortnite, still Roblox, actually, like whole model operates like this. Like if you don't have one of those, I think you're retreating into what you can pull off. And a lot of times what you can pull off are things like remasters, sequels, try to reinvigorate an IP that you think might be appealing to people or stuff like that. But it's like you're retreating from the creative side. And again, with the high expense of making something new, I think that gets really concerning because any bet you take is high risk. Like Sony said, they wanted 12 new live service games, and the vast majority of them is totally tanked. And I think part of it is like you tried to make live service games like you were making single player, like third person open world games. And it was a different model, and they didn't know enough about that shift to pull that off quite right. And they're basically learning it the hard way at this point. But yeah,
help make up for some of those flops. But yeah, these days, I mean, I think a lot of companies are looking around and saying, hey, how can we mitigate risk by making these games take less time and cost less money to make, which is something that I'm certainly keeping an eye on and asking a lot of game companies about and trying to figure out what that future looks like, because it's clear we're at a point of no return for the video game industry. I've talked many times in the past, years and years ago, about how things did not seem viable. This did not seem like a tenable industry. And I think we've reached the tipping point, that's for sure. But if you're wondering why companies like BioWare and Rocksteady and Naughty Dog and so many more have chased this live service dragon over the years, the reason is because having a live service game can really help make up for the volatility that has been part of the video game industry for a long time. All right.
Okay. Man, he said a lot of stuff at the end there, and there's a lot, but they're totally different topics. Like, what's the state of the industry? I do think we're going through a big shift, a big transformation. I don't think it will look like the way it used to. Also, when you see some of these studios chase live service games, I think often they were doing it under external pressure. I know some of them were doing it under external pressure, not internal pressure. To like, oh, we were just trying to create something stable. It was like, no, there was a directive to, shove in live service elements. And part of that is that he's painted a picture, it's a perspective, and I think it's accurate that as I've said, if you have a goose that lays the golden egg, you have a stable business. And that the reality of live service, be it through a sequel model, which is subtly different, or something like a World of Warcraft or an EVE Online or a Warframe or a PUBG or something like that, they create that staple revenue that allows your company to succeed. The thing he didn't address in this was how many investors' eyes lit up when they thought about the ROI of live service products. Could I put, high risk investment funds into games and have somebody turn around the next Fortnite, the next League of Legends, the next World of Tanks, the next, I don't know, what's a good, like Clash of Clans, right, in the mobile space, or Monopoly Go or something like that. Could I just hand someone a pile of cash and say, here's $60 million, and when you succeed, you're going to be making $1 billion a year. And so I'm going to be making, whatever that is, like 12, 14, anyway. I'm going to be making way more per year in perpetuity compared to what I just put in. Like I can literally 100x my return. If you think about how much money League of Legends has made, or some of those early Supercell games have made, or World of Warcraft has made, you look at like what was the initial budget size, and even factoring in ongoing development, how much more money is made in those. The return potential it's just wild, right? Because, and again, from an investment perspective, it's not just that it's like return that much more, 100x, 200x, who knows how much more. It's also that it can continue to do it, right? This is the big difference because, an indie game could cost nothing to make and could make like a few $1 million. And it's like, wow, what a great ROI. But I can't repeat that. With a live service game, the investors are oh so interested because the live service success turns a business into an amazing asset that someone else wants to buy because it prints money. And there are like some of the people who some of the owners of the live service games have been bought out by investment groups who realize, wait a minute, this is like just a stable thing that generates a ton of revenue every year. And we should have that. We want that in our portfolio because, gosh, we invested a little bit and we get all this money back, and it seems to just keep happening and happening and happening as long as we don't mess this up. What's funny is often then they go in and they they don't understand the space, and then they go and they mess it up. So he didn't. I think that would be like a take he didn't have on this, or a perspective he didn't give, was like there was a massive amount of investment that happened in the COVID era of investing in games, where a lot of ex-Riot, ex-Blizzard, ex-live service experienced people got massive chunks of money from all kinds of different VCs to go make the next big live service game. And what they all learned is what they were going for was this 1,000x return potential and stuff like that. And what they all learned is that games are really, really, really hard. And even if you have a bunch of what seem like highly credentialed, experienced experts in whatever it is you're doing, they might still make a game that just doesn't do that well. And that it's very, very, very hard. And it's even harder in some sense to break into the live service space, because the advantage that the indie market has is you can go and buy it and play it for a few hours and think, man, that was a lot of fun, I enjoyed that, and then walk away and everybody's won. But when it comes to these studios that are trying to build live service games, that just doesn't work. If someone goes there, it's like a restaurant. Like you can't put a restaurant in, and I love the analogy of restaurants for live service games. If everybody went to the restaurant and said, it was a pretty good restaurant, yeah, I enjoyed it, it had good food, there was good service, I kind of like the atmosphere, but nobody ever goes back, the restaurant dies. If you're a restaurant, you have to get people to come and stay. It's easier to get people to just show up once. And a lot games used to operate on that. You buy it once, you play it, and then once you're done, you're done. Similar to how you go see movies or anything else. A lot of other media, historically, you go, you see it, you've kind of, I have the media, right? Like maybe I buy a CD, like, okay, I own the CD. I don't give you any more money in perpetuity for this. Nowadays you do with Pandora and Spotify and that sort of stuff. But, I'm going to go to the restaurant and I'm going to try it. And if it's not high enough on my list, then if it doesn't sort of jump up on everything else, I'm not going to be a regular there. And if that restaurant doesn't get enough regulars, the restaurant goes out of business, even if everybody thought it was good. This is what happens to a lot of live service attempts, is they make something, it's not terrible, it's fine, it might be okay, some of them are bad, might even be really good, but nobody hangs around. Eventually everybody starts going back to whatever else they wanted to play. Sometimes for other people, that's other live service games, the other black hole games that we do talk about that have already been mentioned ad nauseum in this very long react. But you also have people who they don't even play those sorts of live service games. They're going to go back and they're just go, okay, cool, I played this game, I played it for 8 hours or 10 hours or 60 hours, and now I'm going to move on to play the next game that I'm going to play for 8 hours or 60 hours or whatever it is. So yeah, that was an angle he didn't capture in this. There were a lot of investors who thought that, wait a minute, games seem like they're really profitable, but the problem was they were completely cherry picking their sample set. They were looking at only the most successful live service games and going, I want a piece of that, without realizing that the vast majority of live service games, as with all games, fail. And actually, I would argue live service games have a higher failure rate because of the unique constraints put around them compared to some of the more classical single player experiences of, 2-3 decades ago, where someone would make a game, and if it sold 500,000 copies, it could be a success. It could be a win. Nowadays, if you want to make a successful live service game, you probably need either a very, very small footprint, or you're going to need millions of people playing it every month. And that is it's really hard to do. It's really hard to break into someone's life and become their forever game, or one of their few forever games, because people generally can't have that many of those. They have other lives to live. A lot of people kind of have maybe one or two of them, and then there's some other games that they enjoy. And you're trying to break in, you're trying to unseat something. And first mover advantage, network effects, the investment that the person already has, emotional and monetary, into those things, it all just makes it hard to peel people away into your new live service project. So anyway, he didn't hit that angle, but I liked his video. I think it's an important thing to say for all the people out there saying, I hate live service games and I wish you wouldn't have them. As a game dev, part of me says, okay, so it seems like you're very happy, and this might be fine, with the game devs just having wildly unstable, volatile lives where they are underpaid relative to their skill set versus other places they could go, so that they can produce for you entertainment at a very low price point. And you might go yeah, that's what I want. Okay, well, cool. Again, not wrong per se, just recognize before live service, we were volatile. And in a world where we're moving towards where like live services again seeming to have, it's not shrinking, but it's sort of calcifying around a few major products. Um, it and breakthroughs are very rare, and you're going to have more people that don't have that sort of goose that lays the golden egg to fall back on. That volatility returns. And now you do have people, very experienced people, game devs, leaving the industry because they can't find work or they can't find work that will pay them enough for them to live on. And those people are just gone now, and they are unlikely to come back. And we lose their experience. We lose what they know about game development. And so, as you're out there and you're thinking about that, if you're someone who's like, yeah, I hate live service games, I think they're a plague upon game development. They were one of the things that actually made the industry almost stable for a little bit of time. I don't think it's going to last long term. I think we're seeing it's not going to last to his point. I think the industry is transforming and shifting. But yeah. So anyway, I've ranted enough. Great job by Jason Schreier. Disagree with him here or there. Hopefully I was able to add some perspective around that. But I love his takes on this. I appreciate what he's doing. So if you thought this was interesting, like and subscribe. Cheers.